Greetings everyone! This is a quick promo before the video begins. If you're new to the channel and you didn't know it yet, I am actually an author in addition to being a YouTuber, and I have 2 books that you can get on Amazon. Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1 and The Occult Mafia. The first is sort of a bizarre, absurdist kaiju anime mashup, and the other is a horror noir story with a hint of a western thrown in there. They're both set in the same universe, and at this point have received mostly positive reviews, so you might want to check them out. I've provided Amazon links for both of them down in the description. They're both available in either paperback or Amazon Kindle, and Operation Red Dragon is also available in audiobook form. So if either of these strike your fancy and you want to support a struggling artist, feel free to go down and check out either one or both of them. Alright, the shameless self-promotion is out of the way, we can get on with the video. Thank you all for your support. Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am the Omni viewer, and it's that time again. We've gotten another episode of Primal, which means it's... Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am the Omni viewer, and it's that time again. Another episode of Primal has come, which means it's time for another review of that episode. This one is the eerily titled Coven of the Damned, a pulp fiction title if ever I heard one. And this is a very, very different episode from the norm, if only because it introduces the supernatural in no ambiguous terms. Like, up to this point, we haven't really seen anything in Primal that you couldn't technically explain as somewhat grounded. Yes, you have zombie viruses, and yes, you have bizarre creatures, but you could still look at all of those and say, well, it's possible, given what we've seen this world is like, that those could just be completely scientifically based. Even if it's bizarre science, it would still somehow not be supernatural. Here in Coven of the Damned, they just went all out with, yes, this is black magic. There's no ambiguity about that at all. And I'm curious to see how people will respond to that, because I see one of 2 reactions. Either people will see it as an expansion of what we know of the primal world, or it will be seen as completely breaking the primal world for introducing something that's just completely beyond what we've seen up to this point. For my own part, I don't think it's that big of a deal. I think this is pretty common for what you see in the pulp works that inspire Primal. The Robert E. Howard sort of things, where it goes along and things are pretty grounded for the most part, but then you get this one story that just goes all out crazy, high mysticism, high fantasy for like one adventure, and then it's back to the more grounded stuff until the next over-the-top story comes along. It was pretty common fare, so in that regard I think it fits in quite well. It does raise a lot of questions, certainly, and it introduces a lot of unusual elements, but, well, let's go in the proper order, shall we? So it's interesting that this episode introduces magic right after I do a dissertation about how in the primal world it seems like the closest we get to seeing right and wrong in their particular rules in that particular world is that natural is right and unnatural is wrong. And it's hard to get more unnatural than black magic. So that raises an interesting question. Do these witches, if you will, fall into the realm of being unnatural, and does that make them evil? Or is it what they're doing that's evil? Because what they're doing is kind of messed up, and yet at the same time it's not entirely awful per se. Like, alright, these witches are not trying to summon demons or destroy the world or something. From what we are able to gather, and we have to only surmise most of this because again, this is a show with no dialogue, it seems like this is like a group of women that just sort of are incapable of having children anymore. Whether they were never capable or they just never had the opportunity, we can only guess. But they've all apparently gathered together because this one particular entity, the head witch, if you will, the truly supernatural being, she can somehow grant them that wish. She can give them children that she births herself. It's just that she does it by basically draining the life force out of whatever poor Neanderthal man they happen to capture and sacrifice, essentially. It's twisted by any definition of the word, and yet it just seems to be simply so these older women can be caregivers. It's just so they can be mothers, essentially. And that's not really an evil cause per se, but the way in which they're going about it is certainly evil. I mean, we could have a whole discussion about the nature of consent, certainly. But yeah, it's sort of one of those weird things where it straddles the line between what they want isn't evil, but what they do to get it, there's very little you can do to justify it. So yeah, that's a weird one. I'd have to see the episode many, many more times before I could make any sort of snap judgment on that. Well, not snap judgment, but you know what I mean. I gotta say, the witches are eerie. Like, really eerie. And I was wondering how they were gonna do it, too, because witches these days have sort of been portrayed as feminist icons as of late. Because, you know, why wouldn't you want your movement to be associated with godless sorcery and cannibalizing children? It's kind of a weird thing that's a bit more complicated than I have room to discuss here, really, just off the top of my head. But I was wondering how they were going to do it. Were they going to go just full-on Pulp Fiction evil witches? Were they going to try to be subversive? Or was it gonna be somewhere in between? As you may have already guessed, it is kind of somewhere in between. Again, they don't want something evil, but they are evil in getting it. And the lead witch in particular is very effective in how creepy she is. And again, fully supernatural here. There's no implication that it's illusion or she's some sort of alien traveler or something. This is full-on magic. And the way in which they portray her as this tall, very rail-thin being that in some shots doesn't even look like she has a face other than the eyes. And she transforms into this weird shadow entity when she actually does the ritual. This is some really atmospheric stuff here. And yeah, that first time where Spear and Fang witness the ritual happening at the beginning of the episode, where they see that other caveman who is unlucky enough to be the unwilling father of this new child, that is some grade A Hammer horror stuff right there. But obviously a little bit above what Hammer was capable of doing in terms of visuals. Not knocking the Hammer visuals, mind you. I'm just saying you can do more with animation than you can in live action. And this is proof of it. What they do with that creature as she's transforming and all, yeah, that was some eerie stuff. Great visuals. Excellent visuals. This is a very visually interesting episode. And it stands out among episodes of an already visually interesting show. So it definitely has that going for it. Let it never be said that this episode was not interesting to actually watch. But I think it also has some really great character moments. And I think that's always important. A lot of people will always point to Primal and view it as an action series, which it definitely is. But like I said in my Solomon Kane movie review, you can always tell whether or not an action film or an action story is truly great by the moments where there are no action, because that's where the actual story is being told most of the time. And this one has some great moments. In particular, like, you have the scene where Spear has been captured and Fang has her mind taken over by these witches. And there's this one witch that was singled out at the beginning who clearly we saw that her heart wasn't in it. She was still participating in the ritual, but she just wasn't as enthusiastic as the others for some reason. And she's the one riding around on Fang. And when Spear sees them, he starts freaking out, calling out to Fang to try and snap her out of it, and it almost works, which is another great sign of how close they've become. But you can also say that's kind of something we usually see, that two characters can share a bond that can break mind control, it's so strong. But that leads to one of the more interesting moments in the episode, where in order to figure out what's going on, the little witch hag who's been riding around on Fang decides to enter the character's memories. She would naturally be curious. The only connection she's seen like this between a humanoid being and an animal being is between the leader of the coven and her pteranodon steed, but that's because of magic and mind control like what she's using. This seems to be different, so she wants to know what's going on. So she does this weird magic thing where she creates a ring in the sand that she can then pick up like a portable hole from Looney Tunes and jump through to enter the character's memories. Again, this is one of those things where people could easily say this breaks the reality, but I don't have any problem with it. And we do get to see moments of the first episode. You know, the moments where Spear and Fang respectively lose their families to those giant red carnosaurs. Not easy to live through again, but we also get to see what they were like when their children were actually born. Well, not when both of Spear's children were born, but when his daughter was born. And those are some nice, tender moments we get to see the two in. Made all the worse by when we are once again forced to live through the deaths of those children. And this proves to actually be a major point, not for either of those characters, but for the little witch character. Because when she's done, she freezes time, like I said, I think I said she did that before entering their memories. She unfreezes time, Spear's done trying to snap Fang out of it, and most powerful moment in the whole episode, there's this moment where the witch locks eyes with Spear, and her expression doesn't change. She just has this look conveying nothing but sympathy and a sense of, like she's saying, I really feel for what you're going through, and I'm sorry, but I can't do anything to help you. And while her expression remains the same, Spear's expression as he's looking at her slowly changes. No dialogue, of course. They don't even really have any sounds from either of them. But it's very, very well done, that scene. And of course, that leads to us learning the witch's backstory, in which we see that during one of these rituals, she was given a daughter. At least I'm assuming that all the children are daughters because, coven of witches. But she was given a daughter by the head witch, and it seemed like they had a truly happy family dynamic until tragedy fell. Only, instead of losing her daughter to a predator, it was losing her daughter to a tragic accident, where they were in a meadow, there were these little red insects flying around, and they were gathering flowers, and the mother just looks away for a second, and the next thing you know, the girl has accidentally wandered off a cliff and fallen to her death. It was an unfortunate accident, like I said. And, part of you might say it's parental neglect, but is it really? Because I think we've all had those moments where we look away for 1 second and something happens, and we think if I hadn't been looking away for that second, it could have been prevented. But how do you really know? Either way, it happened, and the implication seems to be that she wasn't going to get a replacement. Not that anyone could replace the child, but it seems like we only ever we see a couple other of these old hag type characters with children, but it always seems to be one witch, one child. And I guess that's enough to imply that this particular one had her shot and she's not getting another. Hence why her heart's no longer in it. Really, this is her story, in a way. It's the story of this little witch part of this coven that Spear and Fang just happen to wander into, and their presence helps her reach that point where she's ready to defy what her cult is doing, basically. She kills the Pteranodon steed, and this sparks a grand battle royale between Fang and the head witch, who transforms into this massive dire wolf. And yeah, this is another intense fight. Not the bloodiest of fights, certainly. This is actually one of the more tame fights we see, but the main point isn't necessarily to be an action scene in this case, because the smaller witch winds up intervening by transforming into a raven and allowing Spear and Fang to get away. And it leads where you think it's leading. The smaller witch winds up dying. She sacrifices herself in order for them to get away. And that leads to an interesting ending where I think we basically confirm that the afterlife exists in Primal. Because the last thing we see is this small witch hag in a field being reunited with her daughter. They're both dead, there's no ambiguity about that, but we're seeing them reunited in some ethereal plane as this heavenly choir seems to be singing. I'm pretty sure that confirms that at the very least there's a heaven of some sort in Primal. And again, I wonder how people are going to respond to that. I don't think it's meant to be some sort of illusion or last-minute memory thing. If you see a fly buzzing around, I don't know where it came from. I feel like I'm at the vice presidential debates. But anyway, back on track. I don't think it's some kind of illusion. Everything else we see is so unambiguously supernatural in this episode that I don't know why this would be the exception. And it feels like a good note to end on. You know, speaking of that heavenly choir, the music in this episode was really atmospheric. Like, the music has been great throughout, but this was really creepy, really good at setting the tone. And very curious, in fact, that the music cuts as the credits roll, which I think is the first time Primal has done that. The first time it's decided to leave us with a bit of silence at the end of an episode. I think that's good because it really drives home the finality of this witch's arc. Even though she does seem to have wound up in some kind of heavenly afterlife, it's very clear that her story in this world is done. When the music continues in the other episodes over the credits, that means the story still has a long way to go. Spear and Fang's adventures will continue. This character's adventure will not. That's done. Good move. Not a typical move, but definitely a good move. So definitely a break from the norm, but not an unwelcome one. Coven of the Damned was a nice change of pace, definitely an eerie change of pace, and definitely showed us some really twisted stuff, but in a good way. And I have no idea what the next episode's going to be about. We got a POV shot and then a shot of some Ceratopsian looking dinosaurs, and I'm not sure what it's going to be, but, well, I'm curious. Either way, that was this episode of Primal. And, you know the drill. If you managed to catch the episode and you have any thoughts about it, share your thoughts in the comments section below. And hopefully next week this fly won't be here. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. Like and subscribe, then go down to the description to find links to follow us on DeviantArt, Patreon, and Twitter. While you're there, you'll also find the Amazon links for the original novels Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, and The Occult Mafia. 2 books I think you'll really enjoy. Thank you all, and we appreciate your support.